At the end of the 18th century, the world was just buzzing with optimism. It felt like revolutions in thinking and in politics were promising this absolutely limitless future for humanity. But then one man, a quiet English reverend named Thomas Malthus, comes along and publishes this essay that just throws a huge bucket of cold water on all those dreams. He laid out what he saw as an inescapable cycle of misery, a concept we now call the Malthusian Trap. So let's dive in.
Now, what's so fascinating about this quote is that it shows Malthus wasn't some kind of cynical villain who just loved tearing down hope. I mean, you can hear it in his words. He gets it. He saw the beauty in that vision of a perfect world. He really, really wanted to believe in it. But as he saw it, there was this massive fundamental flaw in the logic, an unconquerable difficulty that he felt like everyone else was just completely ignoring. So, what exactly was this incredible dream he was pushing back against? Well, you have to remember the time period. This was the peak of the Age of Enlightenment. The French Revolution had just turned the old world upside down, and it seriously felt like humanity was on the verge of some new golden age. You had these brilliant philosophers, guys like William Godwin in England and the Marquis de Condorcet in France, and they were basically arguing that human reason could solve any problem. They believed that things like poverty and crime weren't, built into us, but were just the result of bad systems, like corrupt governments or private property. Their thinking was, hey, fix the systems and you perfect humanity. Simple as that. And this is right where Reverend Thomas Malthus enters the picture. He wasn't really arguing against their politics, not directly. He just believed these utopian thinkers were starting from completely the wrong place. It's like they were trying to design this beautiful roof for a house before they'd even secured the foundation. And this is absolutely crucial to understanding his whole point. Malthus just completely flips the script. He says the core problem isn't our institutions, it's our biology. He believed there were these fixed laws of nature, as real and as unchangeable as gravity, that put a very, very hard limit on any dream of a perfect society. Okay, so this brings us to the mathematical heart of his entire theory. Malthus built this great difficulty of his on two principles that he thought were so obvious they weren't even up for debate. These were his two postulata, or his basic assumptions. First, people gotta eat. Can't argue with that. Second, people are gonna keep having kids. He saw these as just fixed, biological facts of life. And from these two really simple starting points, he pulls a conclusion that is just devastating. And there it is. That's the one. The single most famous line from his entire essay, and it is the engine that drives the whole Malthusian trap. Now, it sounds a little academic, geometrical, arithmetical, so let's break down exactly what he meant by that. So, Malthus was talking about two totally different kinds of growth. On the left, you've got population. He said it grows geometrically. It multiplies. Think about it. Two people have 4 kids, those 4 can have 8. It's an explosive exponential curve that just skyrockets. But food production, over on the right, that only grows arithmetically. You just add to it. You clear a new field, you add 1 more unit of food. It's a slow, steady, plodding line. He literally called them powers of a superior and inferior order. This table, using his own numbers, just makes the problem crystal clear. Look, we start out fine. Population and food are balanced, 1 to 1. After 25 years, they both double. Still good. But then, look at that next jump. Just 25 years later, the population doubles again to 4. But we can only manage to add 1 more unit of food, bringing the total to 3. Suddenly, there's a gap. Now fast forward to 100 years out. You've got a population of 16 trying to survive on just 5 units of food. That gap has become a massive chasm. And that right there is the trap. This isn't some far-off problem for when the whole planet is one big farm. Malthus was arguing that this pressure is always on, it's immediate, and it's been happening for all of human history. The power of population is relentlessly straining against the limits of what we can grow. So the big question is, if population is always trying to outrun the food supply, what stops it? I mean, how is the balance ever maintained? Well, Malthus's answer is pretty grim. He argued that nature has ways of enforcing the balance through a series of what he called checks. And he broke these checks down into 2 main types. On the left, you've got preventive checks. These are basically human choices that lower the birth rate. A young man thinks, man, I just can't afford a family right now, so he waits to get married. That's a preventive check. But on the right, you have the positive checks. And these are the things that increase the death rate, hitting the poor and vulnerable the hardest. We're talking about famine, disease, war, and all the awful conditions that lead to high child mortality. And here's his absolutely brutal summary of it all. At the end of the day, whether it's the preventive check of a man being too poor to get married, which Malthus thought led to vice, or the positive check of a child dying from hunger, the outcome is the same. In his worldview, the only things keeping population from completely overwhelming the food supply were, quite simply, misery and vice. So for Malthus, history wasn't some straight line of progress heading ever upwards. Nope. It was more like a perpetual cycle, a constant yo-yo between good times and bad. Maybe you get a great harvest or invent a new plow, and that creates a period of comfort and plenty. But what happens next? People have more kids who survive. The population swells, until it once again bumps right up against the limits of the food supply, which then kicks off a new period of distress. The society just oscillates back and forth, but it never ever truly escapes that underlying pressure. Now, for Malthus, this wasn't just some abstract idea he liked to think about. He applied it directly to the hot-button issues of his day, arguing that a lot of well-meaning efforts to help the poor were actually, believe it or not, making the whole problem worse. He was a really fierce critic of England's poor laws, which gave assistance to the needy. His logic, which you can see laid out here, was that by taking away the immediate fear of starvation, these laws just encouraged poor people to get married and have kids, but they didn't create a single extra grain of wheat. The result? You get more people, but the same amount of food. So now that food has to be divided into even smaller shares for everyone, which, in his mind, just defeated the entire purpose of the laws and made things worse for everybody. And this is so key to his whole argument. For the utopian dreamers, overpopulation was this fuzzy, distant problem for some far-off future. But for Malthus, it was the central, defining pressure of society, happening right here, right now. For him, it explained pretty much everything: poverty, war, the endless cycle of human struggle. And if all those other checks, all that misery and vice, failed to keep the population down, he believed nature had one final terrifying tool in its toolbox: famine. To him, this wasn't an accident or some kind of policy failure. It was nature's ultimate, inevitable way of balancing the books between people and food. Of course, there's no way Malthus could have seen the incredible industrial and agricultural revolutions that were coming, things that would dramatically increase our food supply. He couldn't have imagined modern medicine or global supply chains. And yet, his core idea, that tension between population and resources, it still haunts us, which really leaves us with a huge question for our own time. Have we truly, once and for all, escaped the Malthusian trap? Or have we just kicked the can down the road? Is the pressure between our growing numbers and our planet's finite resources still the great unconquerable difficulty of our age?